Thank you. Welcome back. We now move on to item 9, which is plant-based catering options for civic events. And our presenting officer is Catherine Stewart for Climate Change Officer.
Thank you, Chair. So the Committee on Plant-Based Catering Options for Civic Events responds to the plant-based motion that was raised at full council last May. So for reference, there's 3 key civic events each year: the Remembrance Service, the Mayor's Reception and the annual meeting of the council, and then sometimes some additional one-off events such as the twinning events. So following the motion raised at full council, officers have explored a variety of plant-based options by inviting organisations to provide a quote for plant-based catering at a civic event, so that we can understand the options available and the related costs, which are detailed in the committee report. To investigate the practicalities of serving and promoting plant-based foods, officers have engaged with organisations such as the university to learn from their insights on plant-based food, and we've conducted a plant-based catering pilot at the Remembrance Service civic event in November last year, so that we could explore the uptake of plant-based foods compared to non-plant-based food. And the findings, which are detailed in the report from the pilot, where we served 50% plant-based food and 50% non-plant-based food. The findings from this were that it was very successful using a social enterprise to serve the food and drink at the civic event, but we found that there was unfortunately really very low uptake of the plant-based food, and we estimate that under 10% of attendees tried it, whilst the vegetarian options and meat and dairy options were all eaten. The leftover food from the event unfortunately had to be disposed of due to food hygiene laws. So this pilot that we tried unfortunately resulted in a significant amount of food waste. So as a result of the research and the findings, the committee report recommends that the council takes a phased approach to plant-based food at civic events, phasing in plant-based food over a period of time, and phasing out meat and dairy due to the impact that these foods have on greenhouse gas emissions and therefore climate change. Officers recommend that all future civic events should promote and showcase plant-based food by always providing some plant-based foods and plant-based milks, so it would no longer need to be requested as a dietary requirement anymore. We also recommend that catering at the annual full council meeting should consist of 50% plant-based options in 2023. And providing that the majority of these options are eaten, this would then increase in yearly increments to 75% in 2024 and 100% in 2025. Then catering at all other civic events, we recommend should consist of 25% plant-based options during 2023. And again, providing that the majority of those options are consumed, this would increase to, in those yearly increments, to reach 100% by 2026. To further our commitment to sustainable food, we also recommend the council no longer purchases and serves beef and lamb at civic events, and also reduces the amount of pork that it provides because of the high impact on greenhouse gases from those particular meat products. We recommend that the council commit to using social enterprises when available because of the brilliant success of working with a social enterprise at the Remembrance Service. And finally, recommend that the council will use the Plant-Based Food Association definition of plant-based food going forwards, which is that food from plants contain no animal-derived ingredients, which is more commonly known as vegan food. So that was just a very brief summary, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Now, I'd like to notify the committee that we have an amendment to this, a small amendment, but I think possibly we might like to have some discussion before we introduce the amendment, and then if necessary, we'll have further discussion afterwards, after we vote on the amendment. So is there anyone who would like to ask a question now? Councillor Houck.
Yes, thank you. I mean, that all makes complete sense to me. You've made your experiences and you've drawn the right conclusions there. I would just like to briefly ask whether you will keep advertising the council's strategy and also the reasons why we want to provide plant-based food in future public meetings in the same way as you're doing now, maybe with posters and maybe in other possible ways, and how you will collect feedback from attendees in the future, so how they can say what they think and if they have any suggestions for improvement. And maybe just a comment at the end. So I'm not surprised that people don't go for the plant-based food if they're given the option to also go for familiar food, if there's enough of that. So if that fills them up, then why would they go for something that they are not so sure about? But I mean, I guess that's the idea where we want to get to 100% in a few years' time. So yeah, that's all great for me, with me. Thank you.
Thank you. So in answer to your first question, yes, we will keep advertising, keep promoting what we're doing around plant-based food. So as you'll have seen in the report, we displayed posters, and in the appendix of the report you can see the poster that was displayed, and this was displayed close to the food to explain why the council were serving more plant-based food than it had previously, and also the benefits to plant-based food, particularly related to climate change and carbon emissions. And we will continue to display these posters going forward so that we can raise awareness and promote it, try to normalise it. And we'll also have officers on hand at civic events who will be around as they were at the Remembrance Service to answer any questions that people might have about the food, and sort of reiterate what it's saying on the poster, explain why we're doing it and the real benefits that plant-based food have to reducing carbon emissions. In answer to your second question around how we can gather feedback, I think that could be a really important part going forward. We'd really like to hear people's feedback, and part of the feedback will, I suppose, be almost the proof's in the pudding. We'll see how much of it is eaten at each event. But what we propose to do as well is to leave comments cards close to the food, so that people can give their feedback if they wish, so they can comment on how they found it, whether they try it again. But again, we'll have officers around to take that feedback verbally, and we'll factor that into our review after each event, so we can fully understand people's perception of it and people's attitudes towards it. And just on your third comment, I agree. I think this is new to some people, which is possibly why people perhaps didn't try it. We wanted to make sure that there was an equal proportion of both, but actually it just meant that everybody went for the majority of people went for the food that they knew, and that's why we've had it in our recommendations that for most civic events, except full council, we start with the 25%, but we up it as people become more used to it and more aware of it as well.
Thank you very much for that. And questions? Councillor Swift, Councillor Holloway and Councillor Copley.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to make the distinction between sort of plant-based food that's delicious and amazing and just plant-based food as plant-based food. And obviously, there's the question of taste and presentation and culinary arts and everything. And if people didn't like the plant-based food, it might be because it was blooming horrible plant-based food. And it doesn't have to be like that. I was at a food justice meeting, day last year, and there was fantastic plant-based food, and it was really delicious, and nothing was wasted. So if plant-based food is to actually gain acceptance by the public, we've got to make absolutely sure that the plant-based food is properly cooked with proper experts cooking it so that it's absolutely delicious and tempts people to eat it rather than just providing them with something they're told they've got to like when they don't like it. Thank you.
Thank you. I suppose just to reassure you that the food that was provided at the pilot in November, officers felt that it really did look nice. It looked aesthetically pleasing. It was very fresh, which was, I think, from past experience of the officer who organises catering, you don't always find that the food is fresh, depending on, when it was cooked and the time of the event and all that sort of thing. But her comment was that it looked very fresh, and was good quality. And we certainly would be using the food supplier who we used again. We were really impressed with the food, both plant-based and non-plant-based. But I agree, we need to make sure that that continues, that it does look nice and that it tastes nice as well, to try and get more people on board.
Thank you. And Councillor Copley?
Thank you very much for the report, Catherine, and thank you for bringing it back, getting the trial that you've described done, and the work done to come back to this scrutiny committee, which is a really good turnaround from last May. So thank you to you and Penny. My main, I understand there'll be an amendment that will alter that will propose alterations to the recommendations to the full council. So I think it's the Civic one which I'm interested in. As Councillor Swift has mentioned, like at many events, plant-based food is really popular. People, eat it and or try it and or really like it. For some reason, that wasn't what happened at the Remembrance Day service. So despite having put the recommendations forward, perhaps we kind of othered the food by kind of separating it from the other bit, perhaps, and making a big distinction between the two. So I guess my worry and concern is that if we put 25% of it out in a similar way, I don't see why we wouldn't get a similar outcome as a result. As I'm not sure if Councillor Houck said it today or the other day, but if people are given the choice between the food they know and like and or trying something else, that most people won't probably try new food because it's the safe option. So it kind of was, how could we not set it up to fail if given it didn't work with 50% if we set aside 25%? So kind of what I was thinking of was perhaps you could have a small area set aside and say, this is vegan food, so that people, or plant-based food, or whatever terminology is preferred, and then the rest could be sort of mixed together. So there could be, say, small platters of different things, so that it isn't that you've got to make the active choice to go over to the plant-based side. You just go to the food and take a selection of things. And I wonder if people would pick out the meat or the cheese sandwiches or whatever it could be in that scenario, or they would just try a selection of things, if that makes sense. So then the poster wouldn't be saying, here is the plant-based food, please try it. It would be saying, we've got some more plant-based food. I hope you enjoy it as part of your meal. So I think it'd be quite hard to do that with 25% at the Civic event, to have, say, some kind of mixed in, so it wasn't kind of othered. I put that to you as a proposal because I wouldn't want to set this up for failure, given the outcome of the Remembrance Day service. My observation, and yourself and Penny may know more, from the full council meeting in the summer was that the plant-based food was very well enjoyed by the attendees, and I believe that it was all eaten. So there was clearly a different situation happening in the two. and I'm not sure why that is. But I would like to see this successful and in place as quickly as possible, which the amendment will also encourage as we hear about it. So yeah, that's my question, how we can not set it up for failure.
Thank you, Councillor Copley. I suppose there's a couple of things that come to mind there. I think you're right. If it was separated, and apologies, I don't quite know whether it was a separate area. I'd have to double check that with Penny, who organised the catering. I think there is some issues we need to consider around safety and allergies and that sort of thing. So we need to make sure that whatever we offer, we do it in a safe way, and there's not going to be any cross-contamination. I think labelling also, sort of the food labelling, also comes into play here. Legally, as you probably know, we have to label what is in each food product, and I think that probably doesn't help our cause, because people instantly read the label and see that it's see what it's made of, and see that it's not the ingredient that they would perhaps usually go to. But we have to do that by law, so there's not really any getting around that. But I'll take your thoughts on board and definitely think about what it is we can do and discuss it with Penny, because we don't want to see it fail either. We want to be able to promote this and promote sustainable food as part of our as part of the work we're doing to address climate change. And I think possibly the reason that there was slightly different outcomes at the Remembrance Service compared to the full council meeting last year that you mentioned, it might have been we had a slightly different audience, is my only suggestion. But what we're hoping to do is that if we start with the 25%, as you'll know, we want to be able to normalise it. And as people start to see it and start to factor it into their thinking, we want to sort of nudge people. And the behavioural change research that we've found advises that actually these small steps are really worthwhile because they signal the importance of an issue. So we're trying to sort of incorporate these principles into the offering in a way that doesn't also contribute to food waste as well. So we're just trying to find that balance. So yeah, we'll certainly take your comments on board and see whether there's anything we can do in future meetings.
Thank you very much. Councillor Holloway, did you have a question? Okay, a quick one, please.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So I guess in terms of mixing them up together, I completely agree with you. It's extremely important to say what's in each thing. The kind of words you use to describe things can be important. So potentially using the most accurate descriptor with the ingredients underneath could be a way to make different foods more appetizing. And also, I don't mean specifically mixing them onto a same platter, because I agree with you about the problems with that. But instead of having, say, 2 tables, one is plant-based and one isn't, the individual kind of plates or foil platters could be in the same area as in the plant and non-plant-based mixed together. And the second thing I just wanted to request was, I think a kind of immediate cessation of beef and lamb is a really important thing. And I think that is also a really important message that a lot of people don't know about the disproportionate climate impact of that. So having that message communicated could be really helpful as well, to say we are not serving any beef and lamb because it's got lots of emissions or X more emissions, or whatever communication you and the communication team think is the best. But that could be a really helpful message to share with a new audience.
Thank you. We'll certainly take those on board, particularly around communicating that message around not serving beef and lamb any longer, because that will really make a bit of a difference to not contributing to those really high impactful emissions.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Councillor Holloway, did you have a question as well as the amendment that you were going to propose?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Catherine. This is similar to what Councillor Copley was talking about, but I'm a bit sceptical about the behaviour change that might occur given these events are annual and there are 3 of them in a year. Maybe some people will go to all 3, maybe some people are going to one of those each year or just as a one-off. So I just wonder how far their behaviour might change in the next 3 years and whether it's therefore likely that the amount of plant-based food eaten at any one of these events would increase, or the percentage of the plant-based food available eaten would increase. So yes, I share Councillor Copley's concerns about there potentially being not that much eaten just because people are currently used to not really eating plant-based food. And so I wonder whether that is as relevant an item to measure as which plant-based foods people are eating, because we've said we want to introduce plant-based foods and 100% plant-based foods for our events. We know that there are really important reasons to do that. So I think probably the more important aspect of this is looking at which foods are popular, and then when we do go to 100%, we can serve those and everyone will enjoy it, hopefully.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It's hard to embed behaviour change. Full stop. So, and I agree. There's sort of 3 key events a year and possibly a few others. So whether we can embed behaviour change through these events is a very valid question. But I suppose what we're trying to do is take the principles of what we know works to change people's behaviour, and incorporate them here, because there is so much sort of behavioural science around it. So we're trying to do it to make it effective. And I think you're right, if we're finding that not much is eaten, there's that element to it, but then on the other end of the spectrum, we don't want to contribute to that food waste issue, as I said. So if we did, we're finding that not much is eaten when we provided the 50%. So our concern is that if we provide, if we were to provide 100% or more than that 50% to begin with, we would just see even more food waste. And I think in my report I say that sort of 10% of global emissions are as a result of food waste. So we want to make sure we're not contributing to that any further. And so recommending this phased approach, we hope that it would be eaten, it won't be wasted, and that people will get used to it the more they hear about it and the more they see it, and the more of it that's there. But I note your point around noting down what plant-based food is served, and noting down which parts of that is eaten, because we can take that into account for the future, and again that would hopefully prevent any issues around food waste as well.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Andrew, did you want to speak?
Well, I suppose I just reflecting on councillors' comments and so on, that I suppose we're not operating in isolation. So yes, we do 3 events of this a year, but there is a lot of information in the public domain now. You go in any supermarket, they'll have plant-based food kind of aisles and so on. So it's becoming more common. And I suppose whether our activity on this does contribute a massive measurable change or not, I think we'll find out. That's why we're kind of doing this kind of approach. But I suppose just to bear in mind that there are other kind of sources of information impacting on people and how they behave and so on. And we're showing community leadership in this by kind of making this change now and setting our ambition. So we're kind of signifying and signalling, I suppose, perhaps more importantly than the actual absolute number of meals and so on. So I think that councillors can take heart from that, hopefully, and recognise that there is more information being shown in the media about the delicious food you can make in a plant-based diet and so on. More health advice getting out there, so we're contributing, amplifying that. We're not acting alone, and I think that's kind of just context to bear in mind, hopefully.
Thank you, Andrew. More questions? Yeah, right, Councillor Swift and then Councillor Carling.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just think the whole emphasis must be on making plant-based food delicious, and the task of the chef or the cooks should be to make something that is so delicious that people aren't told to eat it, but they choose to eat it. And that's what the whole thing is about, nudging people to become plant-based food eaters. And to sort of talk about it in a dry academic way is almost missing the point, because you can't force people to eat food that they don't want to eat. It's the task of us to make it so good that people want to eat it without being told. Thank you.
Carling?
Thank you. Yeah, I think perhaps we can address some of the concerns Councillor Swift's raising in some ways by actively consulting people who've eaten the plant-based food, what they thought of it, in terms of just to make sure that we are, I'm sure we are doing that to an extent, and that may well kind of address those concerns. I think we've spoken a lot about how people's behaviours might change as a result of this, or how we're trying to kind of nudge people into considering more plant-based options. But I think it's also important to bear in mind that fundamentally people don't like to feel as though that's going on. They don't like to feel as though there's external pressures influencing the decisions that they make. So I think perhaps we should trial at certain events not making too much of a big deal out of it, as much as we perhaps did at the Remembrance Service. I think the poster that was put up is really high quality and it has so much great information in it. But perhaps we should try kind of not doing that a couple of times and just having more of the plant-based food around and seeing if perhaps people take it up voluntarily, rather than almost being put off by thinking, oh, hang on, there's an agenda here, I need to avoid that, if that makes sense. I think it's important that we consider that as well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really interesting thought that you've suggested. And actually, through our conversations with the university, the University of Cambridge, they were talking to us about how they've integrated more plant-based food into their menus on campus and cafes. And that was part of their approach. Was they did a number of things, such as training their chefs up, working with a conservation society, making sure chefs really understood how to make the food delicious, as Councillor Swift said, but also I think they just swapped the food over and didn't make a huge deal about it, exactly as you suggest. And so I think we should take that into account, and happy to sort of work with Penny and other officers to see whether that would be something we could trial, and like you say, and see whether that does have a different uptake if people don't realise that they're sort of, we're trying to influence their behaviour. So thank you for that. We'll definitely take that on board.
Thanks, Catherine. I think that's all the questions now. So, Councillor Holloway, would you like to move your amendment?
It's a very short amendment. It's very similar to what we're doing, but it's just accelerating the process to 2 years rather than 3 years for the council AGM. And so that would go 75% then 100%. And that's because I think we, as councillors and council officers, are in a better position to show leadership on this, and we can probably make that process a bit quicker for ourselves than for the other events where we've got more people who are not necessarily who haven't necessarily voted to bring this forward, and so don't necessarily have the responsibility to promote it as much as we do.
Thank you, Councillor Holloway. And I'd like to second the amendment. Just to say that I fully support the work that you're doing, Catherine, and I think it's going very well and going in the right direction. And the phased approach is absolutely right. And I would also point out, just add in that, yes, you're absolutely right that we do need to label food, however much we want to encourage people, because people have special dietary needs, and it's very important that you provide alternative options and that people know what they're eating. But we did, as members, we did agree to support plant-based food and supplying it for our catering. And last year at the annual full council, it was quite obvious that all the plant-based food did get eaten, that it was very, very tasty, and it was actually the non-plant-based food where there was food left over. So we felt confident enough to say that I think we can move a little faster on this one, and this one only, and say that for the next annual full council, we could move to having 75% plant-based rather than 50, but not for the events where there are more members, more people attending who are not members. And so therefore I'd like to second the amendment. Did you read out the amendment? Yeah. So the proposed amendment is that catering at annual full council in 2023 will consist of 75% plant-based options, increasing to 100% in 2024 rather than 50%. And that providing that the majority of plant-based choices are consumed at events and that suppliers can fulfil this requirement at the same cost as non-plant-based food. So could I please have a show of hands, those who are supporting the amendment? Pardon? Yes, would you like to speak?
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I just put it to the committee and the other councillors that we all voted to transition, I believe, begin to transition was what the final amendment said, to have these meetings as fully plant-based. And obviously we've had the less successful trial at the Remembrance Day service, but at our meeting, the plant-based food was really popular. And so I put it to the councillors that going to fully plant-based for the next meeting, potentially with councillors who would request different meals to be able to request that. So like special dietary requirements, if some people felt they wouldn't have it, would be more kind of in keeping with our goals and desires from what we voted in last year. So may I propose an amendment to go to 100% plant-based next year, with councillors able to request a different diet if they wish to, but I imagine that would be less than 25% of meals.
Thank you, Councillor Copley. When drawing up this amendment, we did consider that option, but there will be people attending that full council who are not councillors, and therefore we felt it was right to maintain 25% non-plant-based, and that's why we went for that option rather than 100%, because those people have not debated and will not be expecting a fully plant-based event.
Thank you, Councillor Pounds. If I could just come back on you on that. We are elected representatives to kind of make decisions about how the council works. And having this meeting as fully plant-based may potentially give confidence for the other meetings to go to a more plant-based scenario. A lot of us discussed today about potentially like the choice and such like, and how people may choose what they're more familiar with. So this could be an opportunity to have a fully plant-based meeting that last year we have indications that food was successful from the same group of people or an equivalent group of people. and it could give us some very good learnings and potentially speed up and give more confidence to the other work of the civic events.
Thank you. Is there any more debate? Councillor Hawke? Sorry.
Yes, I mean, even though I was happy with the previous proposals, I would actually second Councillor Copley's proposal now. I was actually under the impression after we passed the motion that we would have only plant-based food from now on, so I would be perfectly happy with that. And I actually agree, I mean, as councillors, this would be a good signal to the public. I think plant-based food, the plant-based food we had before was delicious, and I mean, I completely agree, we should make it as delicious as possible. At the same time, we also agree that non-plant-based food is bad, has negative impacts, so we want to avoid it. So I think it would be a positive step forward. So I would second Councillor Copley's amendment, if it's possible to make this amendment. Yeah, it is, yeah.
Just to clarify the process, councillors, like at full council, we take one amendment at a time. So we can do this, but the first amendment, if we take first from Councillor Holloway, which we vote on, passes or fails, then we can take any other amendments one at a time. And then once the amendments are voted on, if they are successful, we then move to the substantive vote as amended.
Thank you, James. So we'll move to, Councillor Holloway and then Councillor Carling.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Councillor Copley and Councillor Houck, for your comments. I basically agree with them, but I know that not all people attending that meeting will necessarily be keen to have plant-based food, and that maybe councillors, maybe council officers, maybe various other people who attend. So I think in the interests of compromise and bringing people with us and trying to make sure that the people who aren't necessarily used to eating plant-based food at the moment are more likely to actually take on board, then I think a phased approach probably works a bit better. Also in terms of the potential for a small amount of food waste if it was 100%. And so I just think it's good for officers to test that out, given the significance of food waste. But I'm also sympathetic to what you said.
Councillor Carling.
I was just drawing your attention to the fact that Councillor Holloway had his hand up. I don't have anything to add.
Councillor Hawke.
Can I just clarify? I mean, we will definitely vote on both amendments. So it's not that if the first gets through, then we definitely vote for both. Okay.
Councillor Copley.
Thank you. Could I just put it to Councillor Holloway that the arguments you put against this year being plant-based apply the year after, and there'll be a different set of councillors, a different set of guests. So there isn't, I think, the kind of phased-in type approach. You know, we can either rely on general changes in society of attitude, which I think isn't the leadership role we should be taking as a council. We should be trying to promote kind of positive behaviours and showcase positive behaviours. So having it fully plant-based from next summer versus the year after, I mean, they're more or less equivalent. It's just how much climate leadership we want to show. So I encourage the other scrutiny councillors to support a fully plant-based amendment for next summer.
Councillor Swift.
I just think that we've got to try and persuade people encourage people rather than tell them. I think that there's a big problem with sort of anti-woke brigade. And I think that if we are over-virtuous and all of that in the eyes of some people, it will backfire on us, and it's better to actually go incrementally. We're only talking about a few months, and it's not a particularly big issue, but I think it's more likely to succeed if we do it in a phased way, rather than feeling good about ourselves and actually not being seen as having the common touch in the eyes of the public. And it's a very small position difference, and I think that it's not worth making a fuss over, and what we should put it in the phased way, 75%, 100% over a year. Thank you.
Councillor Holloway. Well, I think
Thanks very much, Councillor Copley. I think this is similar to what we were both saying probably on the other events, and I suppose therefore, yeah, agree with what you're saying. I think that therefore it's about which foods work and don't work and which ones people will and won't eat. So I think it's an opportunity to test out what people like, try to minimise food waste over the next 2 years, and so I think probably a phased approach works a little bit better for that, but they're very similar, and I think that's slightly better. I also think it wouldn't be a bad thing to have it at 100%. For now, I think probably the 75% going to 100% is better, just so that we can test out which foods people like and then hopefully minimise food waste this time round, and then it will help us the following year to also minimise food waste because we will know which foods people like.
Thank you very much. A final point, please, Councillor Copley.
Thank you very much. May I just come back to yourself, Councillor Swift? The kind of anti-woke brigade that you describe, I think would probably object to many aspects of the plan as proposed. So I don't think that the kind of response you describe will be really any different if we were to have 75% plant-based 1 year and 100% the year after, or just 100% plant-based. I think there will have equal impact. I think the only people that would be differentially impacted would be the guests next year for 1 year only, if it all went to plan and went 100 the year after, and chose to eat meat and dairy next year. They would be the only affected group. I think that the other group that you describe will not see a difference between these two options. So it's not a reason not to vote for my amendment, is what I put to the committee.
Thank you. Right, we're going to vote first of all on the first amendment, which is that we proceed to 75% plant-based and 25% non-plant, meat and vegetarian for 2023, and then 100% from 2024. Can I have all those in favour of this amendment, please?
It's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. So, our second amendment is that we proceed faster and that we have 100% from 2023 that is plant-based at the annual council meeting. Can I have all those in favour of that, please?
Agree, Chair.
Those against?
Or against, Chair.
So that amendment is defeated. So now we proceed to the original recommendation. Pardon?
Recommendation as amended.
Yeah, as amended, which is that we have 75% at the annual council meeting of plant-based food in 2023, proceeding to 100% in 2024. Could I have all those in favour of the original recommendation as amended?
Unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I take a recommendation to the Executive Councillor, please?
Thank you, yes, and I did want to, if you'll just indulge me for a moment, Chair, say a couple of things. Firstly, thank you to Catherine and to Andrew, to David, and particularly to Penny as well, who did a lot of the actual work on the day, particularly for getting the report back within 8 months. I know there were some concerns raised that it wasn't coming back within 6 months, but I think we can all see why that requirement was removed in our amendment at full council. I recognise the strength of feeling on this. Councillors have debated a lot about the nature of behaviour change and how you affect that. But we committed to this. It signals an important intention. It's part of our wider work on sustainable food. And part of that actually is publicising and informing. We did agree to do that. It's an important part of this, and we're having discussions with organisations about how we do that. I'm still fully in support of the spirit of the original full council motion. What I was then and am now concerned about is how we make this work in practice. and taking a pragmatic approach to get to our ultimate goal, which I think all of us agree is to serve 100% plant-based food at civic events. Now, I want to see us going forwards, not backwards. I don't want to see us committing to something that will produce food waste. That is not what we're about as a council. I think the stepped approach is sensible. I'm speaking here as someone who has worked as a vegan caterer, running a social enterprise, providing food for events exactly like this. People do get used to it, but it does have to be part, with some people, of a longer conversation. And we do have to remember, I think a couple of people have mentioned, that there are a smaller proportion of people at the May AGM, particularly for the mayor making, who are not councillors and didn't sign up to this. Doesn't mean we shouldn't educate them and inform them and make the food look really tasty. I think most caterers strive to do that. I don't think they actually set out to provide stuff that doesn't look great. I'll show you my album of food later. I think the amendment strengthens this, the original amendment to move to 75%. I agree that as councillors, we've signed up to this and we should move faster. But I do think a stepped approach is important. I also particularly wanted to add the sort of side benefits, like the additional benefits, like using social enterprises, I think are really important as well. So I'm glad to see that continuing. And I look forward to seeing everyone by the vegan sandwich table. And I will be standing in front of the other sandwiches and directing you all that way. Apart from Councillor Healy, apparently. So, yeah, I'm happy to accept the recommendations as amended. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Councillor. And thank you very much, Catherine, for that really detailed and carefully presented report. And if there's anything that we as councillors can do to help with the behavioural change or anything, please do ask us. Yeah. So we're on to our final item, which is just for noting. Item agenda 10 and 10A in our agenda pack on the environmental improvements